So, a quick overview of what we're going to do tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about why we're here doing what we do. And spoiler alert, all those kind of negative words that showed up in the chat have a lot to do with that. We're going to talk about just the basics of the tax services that we provide. We're really going to delve into the customer's point of view going through this process. I'm going to give you a quick introduction to the Tax Slayer Practice Lab, where you will be doing your practice returns. We'll take a break. We'll talk about, just a walkthrough, not literally, obviously, but just kind of the pathway that customers follow as they actually move through the different steps of the clinic. And then we will give you a quick high-level intro to the paperwork that our customers fill out and that we use to prepare returns. This is our executive director, Suyapa Miranda, and this is just a welcome message from her. She could not be here on your first day of training, but she wants you to know we welcome you into a community of cool, passionate, dedicated people. She hopes you share her personal values of growth and innovation, commitment to social justice and equity, and persistence to break barriers and reach people who need our services most. So let's jump right in. The first thing we want to remember is that we want to keep customers at the center of everything we do. This is not drawn to scale, but our customers are really the beating heart of our organization. Everything that we are doing is designed with them in mind to serve them. But there are a lot of different layers to prepare and prosper the organization. And the second concentric ring around the beating heart of the organization is volunteers like all of you. We are very aware that we could not do what we do without the help of our volunteers. And so we want you to know how deeply you are appreciated and how very grateful we are and how much respect we have for the fact that you are here doing all of these trainings and taking certification tests and then giving us 4 hours a week for 12 weeks. I will say I started off as a volunteer and I volunteered a lot of places and I have never, ever volunteered anywhere that was as rewarding as Prepare and Prosper. And I truly hope that as you move through your first tax season, or if it's not your first season, just through your next season, that you will feel the same way I do, that this really is just a remarkable organization and a lovely place to volunteer. The next ring is our staff. That includes our full-time staff who work on the 4th floor at our main office. Mary would know better than I do, 20, 25 people on the full-time staff, I think. And then we also have our seasonal staff, and that is, I include myself there. I am one of the site managers at Merrick Community Services on the east side of St. Paul. And I am going into my 11th tax season and my 10th as a manager. But then beyond the staff, Prepare and Prosper, there's a lot more to Prepare and Prosper than just the volunteers and the staff. We have board members, we have donors, we have various other people who advocate for us or who support us in different ways. And then we have our community, because we know that everything that we do for our customers benefits the community as well. It might be getting a tax refund that they will then, put into their local economy. Things like that. We are very community focused, but the sort of umbrella, the kind of atmosphere that gives us the air that we breathe as we do this work is tax law and IRS regulations. And this is obviously because we have to follow the tax law and the IRS regulations. It's also because Prepare and Prosper operates under the umbrella of the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, or VITA, which is an IRS program. And they give us support and resources. And in exchange, we follow the rules that they set for us. Let me see. So it's important as the as I said, the beating heart of our organization that we really try and keep front and center the that sort of perspective of our customers and trying to remember what they are experiencing as they're working with us. It can be very easy as you're going through training, you're getting hit with a lot of, high level tax information. It's easy to get bogged down in that and lose sight of the customers who are the reason that we're doing this. So we just want to try and orient you at the beginning and hopefully keep kind of bringing you back to that perspective as we go. So at the very outset, I want to talk, and I want you to think about what is involved for our customers in just flat out showing up to get their taxes done. What kind of barriers did they have to overcome? What steps did they have to take just to get there and sit down across a desk from you? And if we were in the room, I'd have people shout it out, but why don't we just put some things in the chat? What do you think that our customers have to accomplish in order to get to us and benefit from our services? Yep, I'm seeing, oh wow, lots of answers. Yeah, they have to actually get to us. There's childcare, there's work schedules. Um, they have to get their materials together. They have to make sure they have all the documents they need to be able to get their taxes done. Yeah, there's a lot. So, these are just, oh, am I drawing that line? Okay. Sorry about that if that is me. Um, so yeah, here are a couple of things that we came up with. They have to schedule an appointment, and sometimes that can be a complicated process. They have to negotiate work schedules. They have to figure out what they're going to do with their kids. They have to get there on time, which means they have to find the place. We do give them a 15-minute grace period, but we may not be able to help them if they're too late. They have to actually physically get there, which means driving, getting a ride, negotiating public transport, metro mobility, and they might have to navigate disability or mobility issues. So, like, particularly, what kind of barriers are there for a customer just to get down to the lower level of our main office to get their taxes done? And I don't know how many of you have been to the main office, but I'll just tell you there are a lot of barriers. The address is on University Avenue, but you enter through a door on Curfew Street. Minute you get inside, there are about 7 or 8 steps right there going up, and there's a lift, but you have to figure out how to use it. You have to worry that it might not work that day. And then you have to actually find your way down to the lower level, get there. There's just a lot. There are a lot of barriers. Parking, knowing the code to get into the parking lot. There are a lot of steps in getting there. And as someone mentioned in the chat, that's not included here, they also have to bring all of the stuff that they need for their appointment. And that's a pretty big endeavor in and of itself. So given all of that, how do you think our customers might show up from an emotional standpoint by the time they get there? When they sit down across the table from you, what do you think they might be feeling? Where do you think their heads are at that particular point? Yeah. Seeing anxious, tired, stressed, nervous, overwhelmed, and exhausted. Yep. Stressed and the recognition that taxes might not be their priority or the thing they woke up in the morning excited to do. Yeah, definitely. Those are all very valid answers. They might be anxious about making a mistake. Taxes are high stakes. They might be overwhelmed by the number of documents they had to find and bring with them. And, do I need this? Do I need that? They might have gotten letters from the IRS or Minnesota Revenue, which can be really scary. They might be embarrassed, if they don't have everything they need, or if they've gotten into trouble with the IRS before, and or if if they're late, if they haven't filed taxes in quite a few years and they're feeling like they're going to be judged. They might be stressed. Tax refunds are huge. They can, for a lot of American families, the tax refund can be as much as 1/3 of the money that they have coming in during the year. So they might really need that money and need it quickly, and that might be what's on their mind. They might be tired because they have busy lives, and now they're here and they're going to sit here for 3 hours, and that they might be pretty exhausted. As I said, they might be worried that you're going to judge them for not knowing all the ins and outs of taxes, or for not understanding, the process, for not knowing the answers to questions. But like Pandora's box, they might also be feeling hopeful, especially if they've worked with us in the past. They might just be excited about the refund that they're going to get, and they might already know that they're going to be treated well and supported by us. And they might just be relieved that they're finally going to get help, especially when issues have been hanging over people's heads for a long time. Just feeling like, anything is better than not knowing. That is often how people are going to feel. But a lot of our customers have experienced financial trauma, and that can show up in a lot of different ways. It can show up as hypervigilance, like the examples that are listed here. Oftentimes, from your point of view as a preparer, that's going to look like them not feeling particularly trusting of you, or wanting to really know everything that you're doing. It can also show up as avoidance. Like when somebody comes in and they have a stack of letters from the IRS and they haven't opened any of them because they're scared, and so they just want to put things to the side and not worry about it. But now they're here and they can't avoid anymore, and that can be stressful. And I mentioned shame. There's so much shame in just, financial people's financial lives. It is really tragic how much shame people live with, and our customers are no exception. Um, and so that can show up in a lot of different ways, like the ones that are listed here. So why do people why do people feel that taxes are traumatizing? Well, there are a lot of reasons. I said they're high stakes. Refunds are a big financial lifeline for a lot of families, and tax debt can be really devastating for a lot of families. Um, the government benefits are delivered through a very confusing tax system. Our government has quietly set up the tax code as one of the major ways that we deliver public benefits to people, but we don't make it easy. We make it very confusing to access those benefits. Um, the system can be punitive. A small mistake can have really big consequences. They might end up having to pay back part of their refund. They might get hit with penalties and interest. It can be a very punishing system. It can also feel dehumanizing. Even when the IRS doesn't try to sound threatening, it feels threatening. And part of that is just how we've been conditioned socially, and part of it is intentional. Um, we know that not all Americans are audited equally. Low income taxpayers, especially Black earned income tax credit filers, are more likely to be audited than high income taxpayers or white taxpayers with or without the earned income tax credit. Uh, you may have seen some of the articles about how the IRS has acknowledged in the past that they can audit hundreds of low income taxpayers in the amount of time that it takes them to audit one billionaire, because billionaires' tax returns are very, very, very confusing, and lower income taxpayers typically have much more straightforward returns. The tax code is very complex and it is structured to benefit people who are wealthy and to disadvantage people who don't have access to, um, to paid preparers or to anybody who really understands the tax code. And that's part of the reason why it's so important that we are here doing this work. But also, high fee tax prep exploits people who really need their refunds most. Um, it's very common for people to have to spend as much as $300 to $500 to get their income taxes prepared. And I mean, if you're looking at a $1,500 tax refund, having to pay $300 to do that, that's like 20% of your refund. And, you know, like it or not, this is people's money. They are entitled to it. Even if all the money they're getting is through credits, by offering those credits, the government has said, this is your money. But to have to pay that much to get to it can be very stressful and very exploitative. And then when you have people with certain immigration statuses, that can make filing taxes feel especially risky. This has always been true, but never more so than today. We do help customers who are undocumented, and for a lot of them, and for even people who are not undocumented, for a lot of people right now, just going out into the world feels scary. But coming to do taxes with an ITIN can feel particularly scary. And if you don't know what an ITIN is, don't worry, we'll get to that. Um, so now that we have this sense of how our customers are showing up, what do we do about it? Well, we want to empower the customer. The tax code is not so straightforward that people never have options. There are often different ways that people can choose to file their taxes. So we want to make sure we know what those options are. We want to be transparent and share information openly while respecting that information overload can be very, re-traumatizing. So we want to make sure that we are not just dumping information at people, but that we're actually giving it to them in a way that they can process and follow and understand. We want to be caring. We want to recognize all that effort, all those barriers, those obstacles that we talked about a minute ago that they had to overcome to get here, and all of those feelings that they're feeling. Um, and and not come across as judgmental or overly rushed or cold. Lead with curiosity. Understand that there's a lot you have to know about this customer in order to prepare their tax return accurately. So without judging them, just get to know them and get to know their situation. Um, Normalize confusion. Acknowledge the fact that yes, the tax code is confusing. Tax law can be bewildering. Let them know that it is perfectly fine to be confused or unsure about things and validate their experience. If they say, I'm really upset about this, say, that makes sense that you're upset. This is traumatizing. And you will learn you'll develop the actual words that you want to say that work best for you as you go. These are just some suggestions. So again, we're not going to turn to our neighbors, but let's just take a pause and reflect on the customer's point of view, as we've just talked about. So maybe put in the chat, what is particularly jumping out to you right now about this discussion? Or if you feel comfortable sharing, to what degree do you relate to this experience of financial trauma, either from your own experience or the experience of people close to you? Let's just take a second to put that in. Yeah, we need to care for the customer first. Yes. Taxes is big business. Yes. The companies like Intuit have huge lobbies, and they, we would have had much more free filing options a lot longer ago if it hadn't been for those lobbies. Um, give them grace. Yes, they're coming in hot. It is amazing and wonderful, and part of the reason why I loved volunteering with Prepare and Prosper enough to join the staff, because it is amazing to see the change in so many of our customers from when they walk in the door to when they leave. It is like it's so I need instant gratification, and you typically don't have to wait very long to see the good work that you're doing. I like that, being a humanizing force in a dehumanizing process. Yes. Time appointments are a big time commitment. That is correct. I see a lot about empathy. Yes, definitely. All right. Well, let's keep going. All right. So we are going to now jump into the basics of the services that we provide. Um, if at any point you have questions about anything that I'm saying, maybe put them in the chat. And Mary, can you be monitoring that and just kind of jump in if I need to stop and answer a question?
Yeah, absolutely, I can.
Awesome. Okay. So we're going to talk about the range of services we offer, what kind of returns we do, what resources we have, and then our income guidelines and the scope of service, which is part of what I was alluding to when I was talking about how we have to operate under the rules for the VITA program. So most of what we do is our in-person tax preparation, and that is what I am guessing most, if not all of you, are going to be involved with during your time volunteering, at least initially. We have 9 locations across the Twin Cities metro area: St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Bloomington. All of our services are done by appointment, although we can take walk-in customers if we have space and availability. We also have Crecimiento Latino, which is our Spanish-speaking site that is not actually a brick and mortar site. Those clinics happen at our main office, but they are conducted entirely in Spanish: volunteers, managers, and customers. We also have special focus programs. So we have a self-employment program. Those are special clinics that happen at our main office on designated dates and times. Those are for customers who have more than $10,000 in self-employment income or just very complex situations. We tend to refer our most difficult situations to self-employment. We also have a remote tax prep program that serves customers who are living in group homes, nursing homes, congregate living facilities, and those are done virtually by a special team of virtual volunteers. We also offer a DIY tax prep option. And for that, customers can reach out to us. We set them up with a login to the TaxSlayer software, and then they can prepare their return on their own with some degree of support from Prepare and Prosper. What is important to know is you're probably only ever going to interact with the in-person tax prep, but it's good to know these other programs exist because you might encounter customers who would be a better fit for some of those. And we can talk a little bit more about that as we go. I think the only one we don't have a slide on coming up for is the remote tax prep. And so I'll just say, typically you'll think about that if you have, say, a customer who mentions that they live in a setting like this, and maybe, they have a disability that makes it difficult for them to navigate the clinic, or they're just feeling very exhausted. It might be worth having a conversation about them, about would our virtual tax prep be a better fit for you. Also remember, though, that you want to get a manager involved anytime that you're thinking about redirecting a customer out of the regular tax clinic to some other service. because we can have more thorough conversations with them and make sure they know everything they need to know for that. Um, all of our sites actually, I do not believe, have all of these clinics this year. I think there are a few sites that have more scaled back offerings, but generally speaking, we try to have a Tuesday evening, Thursday evening, and Saturday morning clinic at each site, and these are the hours of your volunteer shift if you're scheduled on those days. The main office is our exception because they have way more clinics than any of the other sites. All of our sites are locations that we borrow during off hours from other organizations, but our main office we have access to 24 hours a day. So, um, clinics pretty much every day at the main office from late January to tax day. You should be finding out your site and your shift time in the next week or so. I believe they're coming out this week.
Wednesday.
Wednesday. Okay, good to know. So in terms of returns, we can do the Form 1040, which is the federal income tax return for individuals. And when I say individuals, I just mean human beings. So like not business returns. Yeah, Form 1040 is also a return for a married couple. We also do the Form M1, which is the Minnesota state income tax return for individuals. And we can file the Form M1PR, which is a Minnesota specific form specifically to give a property tax refund to homeowners. And this is a standalone form. So it can be filed with or without the other two forms, without the 1040 or the M1. Um, Typically, we're going to see a standalone M1PR when we have a customer who has no income tax filing requirement. An example might be someone who's retired and living exclusively on Social Security retirement benefits. That person has no income tax filing requirement. They're not, if that's their only income, it's not taxable. So they're not going to owe anything. They're not going to get anything back. But if the amount that they get from Social Security is low enough relative to the amount of property taxes that they pay on their home, then they can get a refund of part of those property taxes back from the state. And so in that case, we won't bother to file their income tax returns, but we can do their M1PR. Now, it is worth noting that prior to tax year 2024, the M1PR also included a rent credit, a credit for people who rent. Um, as of 2024, that rent credit has been rolled over into the Form M1. So now people who want to claim the rent credit just file the regular Minnesota state income tax return. And I mention that just because last year was the really kind of bumpy transition year when we were having to educate a lot of our customers about that. Um, Many of them already do know that this is the new process now, but if anybody maybe didn't file last year, they might have to learn that this year. So um, the M1PR is only for homeowners at this point. In terms of resources that you have available to you, there is IRS publication 4012. You will have one of these, a hard copy of these, in your volunteer bags. They are also available virtually online through the IRS or as a PDF that you can access from the Prepare and Prosper laptops. This is specifically a guide for the VITA program. It is tailored to VITA volunteers and the issues that we work on. This image says 2024 returns, but you will get a 2025 4012 to work with. It has a lot of really helpful information. It has flowcharts, interview questions to give you an idea about how to talk through different topics, and it has specific instructions about how to put things into TaxSlayer. You also,
Real quick, I just put the link to the PNP Volunteer Tax Manual in the chat and the link to the Pub 4012 in the chat. But you also got an email about when you can pick up your in-person or your paper manuals today. And there is a quick question in the chat.
Mhm.
What happens when a client gets an audit notice from the IRS after filing with us?
Um, well, they would want to do what the audit notice tells them to do. And they would probably, since tax season would most likely be over by that point, I think their best bet in terms of getting any support from us would be to just call our main office. I actually am not really up on what we offer, if anything, in terms of audit support.
I can
Um,
add a little bit.
yeah, for it.
Basically, we have someone in our PNP main office, and part of their job is to deal with like basically potential errors or things like this. So if someone calls and says, "Hey, I got audited when you did my taxes, what gives?" We have someone on staff who will work with them through that. And the organization also has insurance for things like this. So no individual volunteer is going to, if we're going to be on the hook for any error.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. I learned something new tonight.
Oh, yay.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate it.
So, in addition to your Pub 4012, you also have your Prepare and Prosper Volunteer Tax Manual. As the name indicates, this is a manual that the Prepare and Prosper staff have created with input from volunteers. Um, if you have a bag already, which many of you probably don't, you can take it out and you can follow along. Every slide is going to have page numbers for that. And if you want to have it up on your computer, you can be flipping through it that way too. This manual is good for a couple of reasons. I find it much more user-friendly in a lot of regards than the Pub 4012. Prepare and Prosper works very hard to try and make sure that it is written very clearly, whereas 4012 can get pretty technical at times. That said, 4012 is going to be much more comprehensive than our manual. We try to just really zone in on the most common issues that come up for us. But the other thing that's nice about our manual is that it covers Minnesota state-specific tax topics. So Pub 4012 is an IRS publication. It does not go into detail about each specific state's tax laws. So when you're trying to do a state tax return, the PNP manual is your resource. Um, as I mentioned, we have income guidelines. We just simply cannot help everyone who could benefit from our services. And so we have to draw a line in the sand somewhere. And so what we have come up with as an organization is that we will help single taxpayers with income of $40,000 a year or less, or families with income of $70,000 a year or less. Now, this can be a little confusing because single does not refer to marital status. Think of it as $40,000 a year or less for solo taxpayers. Um, a single taxpayer or solo taxpayer means a tax return where the only individual named is that taxpayer. A family return is any return that names more than one person. So it might be a married couple, that's a family. It might be an unmarried person who is claiming dependents. So anytime you have two people or more, that $70,000 income limit is what's going to apply. I already mentioned the self-employment. If there's more than $10,000 of self-employment income, we want to refer them to the self-employment clinic. Our DIY program has an income limit of $89,000, and that is for um, single returns or family returns. So that's a great option if you have somebody who is somewhere between that $40,000 or $70,000 mark and $89,000. It's also a good option for anyone who has a very simple return and feels up for preparing it and doesn't want to sit around and wait for 3 hours while we do it for them. So someone who's confident in their own abilities could, potentially save themselves some time and energy by doing their own. And then we have our scope of service rules that we have to pay attention to. Actually, let's see, I wonder if I can go back. Okay, I'm going to take a step back because I forgot to say something that's important. These income guidelines are Prepare and Prosper's income guidelines. We set these. Therefore, we do have discretion to waive them in compelling enough circumstances. So an example might be someone who has more than $70,000 worth of income, but they are claiming 13 dependents. We could look at that and say, you know, this is not a situation where you can afford to go spend hundreds or thousands of dollars paying someone to do your taxes for you. But it's important to note that those guidelines get waived only at a manager's discretion. So if you come across someone who's over the income limits, the first thing you want to do is grab a manager, because the manager can either sign off on it or have the difficult conversation of saying, we're not going to be able to help you. You should never turn anyone away without a manager being involved. Now,
One of the commented, this is Bill on the DIY. It's really good if you got a Wisconsin person because we can't prepare Wisconsin taxes.
oh, you just got the other thing I forgot to say, and that is we can do Minnesota returns. We cannot do any other state's returns, not even Wisconsin. So if someone has income from another state and they have to or would benefit from filing another state's return, the DIY program is another good fit because it does have all of the other states available to it. Thank you, Bill. But unlike the income guidelines, scope of service rules are not our rules. They are the VITA program's rules, and we do not have any leeway to deviate from those. So if someone is out of scope for our services, they are not someone we can help. So an example might be someone who has income from driving a taxi cab. Uber and Lyft are okay. Rideshare services are within scope, but taxi cabs are not. Clergy income is not something we can help with. We cannot help anyone who has income from active military service or National Guard duty. There are quite a few of them. I hope that if they don't come up in future trainings, that you will take some time to look in your manual in Pub 4012 and kind of familiarize yourself with some of the things that we can't help with, because these are absolute no-nos from the VITA program. I will say military returns are within scope for some VITA programs. My stepmother does VITA in Tennessee near a military base, and they do military returns, but we do not. So they are not in our scope of service. A couple tips for while you're going through training. Once you get your training bag, remember to bring it to every session. We do not print enough extra training tax manuals to be able to replace them for everybody. So, but it's a good idea to have your manual with you. You can take notes in it. You can follow along. Remember that you do not have to memorize everything we tell you in training, period. What we're trying to help you with is kind of issue spotting. We want you to know when you have to look something up and get more information about it, and how to look things up and get answers. And that's, if we can teach you that, we'll consider your training successful. Since we're not at the main office sitting at volunteer laptops, this is not really going to go the way I would have it go if we were there. But remember that this password that you see on the screen is the password that you need to have to log into any Prepare and Prosper volunteer computer. So if you want to jot that down somewhere, I cannot remember off the top of my head if it's in your manual, so be on the safe side and make a note of it. It's the same for all sites. At every every Prepare and Prosper laptop, there also is going to be a bookmarked computer links document that will take you to a PDF of the volunteer tax manual in case you ever don't have it with you at one of your shifts. And of course, remember we have our volunteer training site, and the URL is on this slide. Or you can also get to it from just the main PNP website. It also has a PDF of the tax manual and a lot of other resources that will come up during the tax season. Prepare and Prosper does a tax tip every week throughout the tax season, going into a little more depth on a particular tax topic. So you'll be able to access those from the training site as well. Let's talk quickly about TaxSlayer. That's the software that we use to prepare taxes. That is one of those resources that I talked about that we get from the IRS through the VITA program. The IRS chooses the software, and then all of the VITA sites use it. TaxSlayer is kind of an interview style software. I personally prefer it tremendously to what we had before, but I don't think everybody shares my assessment of that. So the software asks you questions and you answer them, and that's how you go through the return, as opposed to other softwares where it's basically like you're filling out a tax form like you would in the old days when you sat at the dining room table and filled out the forms by hand. TaxSlayer is also good about making sure that every question that needs to be answered is answered before you can file the return. So if you miss a step and there's a box that you have to, a question you have to answer and you've missed it, TaxSlayer is going to give you an error message and prompt you to go back and fix that.
Real quick, Amanda, there's a question in chat that I missed a few moments ago.
Okay.
I think it was in regards to the scope and Minnesota returns. It says, does this apply to residents who may have income part in MN for the year and part in another state, or is this a DIY situation?
It will apply. I mean, those customers will be affected by that situation. We can file, we can always file a federal return for someone, even if all of their, if they live in Minnesota now, even if all of their income from last year was from another state, we could still do their federal. We just can't do their return from that other state. But where it gets confusing is that sometimes our customers will encounter situations where they can't find a paid preparer who will do their state return without also doing their federal return. So it's there's kind of a process of talking through their options with them. But our DIY will not allow you to do a state only either. So we can't do their, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this is my impression, that we can't do, like, if they have Minnesota and Wisconsin income, we can't do their federal and their Minnesota and then they just hop on DIY and do their Wisconsin only. They would have to do the whole thing through DIY. So
unless they want to file by mail.
Yeah. But then can they do that through DIY?
Well, they can prepare the return and print it.
And then print it and mail. Okay.
Yeah. They're not e-filing then, so they.
Yeah. So, but that's another big hassle, and it might be it could very well get complicated quickly for them if they try to do that. So, it's kind of like if you have a situation like that, get a manager involved. We'll have a deeper conversation with them about it. But it also sometimes you have somebody who worked. Well, anyway, I'm not going to get into all the ins and outs, but we'll have a fuller conversation, and then that's one of those times when they have options, so they'll decide what's right for them. So in terms of TaxSlayer, you will actually have two separate TaxSlayer accounts. The first one is to the practice lab that I mentioned earlier. So like when you're doing your practice lab as part of training, you'll be using your practice lab account. The thing about the practice lab is you can prepare as many returns as you want in that account, and there is absolutely no danger that any of them will be inadvertently submitted to the IRS or Minnesota Revenue. It's a very safe space, you will use it as part of your practice lab training. We'll give you some sort of hypothetical scenarios so that you can create returns using the information we gave you. You can also just make up information and create fake returns as many times as you want in the practice lab, and you will use the practice lab to take your certification test. Your test booklet has some hypothetical scenarios, so you'll create returns using those scenarios and then answer questions based on them as part of your test. But then once you've passed your tests, you'll get a login later on to your TaxSlayer Pro online account. And that is the account that you're going to use in the tax clinic when you're preparing real returns for real customers that are going to get e-filed. So what we're going to do right now, I hope you all are on computers that you can use to do this. It's probably not impossible on a cell phone, but might be tricky. What you're going to want to do at this point is use the link that you see on your screen, vita.taxslayerpro.com/IRS training, and pull up that website. It will look like this image in the bottom corner of the screen here. That, and also access link and learn taxes. And once you have that up, you see on this one, the link is still there. You're going to want to follow the steps on the screen. And then once you are finished with that, you can go on your break. We're going to take a 15-minute break, but please do set up your practice lab account before you go on break so that if you have any problems or questions or anything, you can come back and we can help you troubleshoot. Remember that the first password you need is this password that's up here in bold in all caps, Train Pro Web, and you do have to enter it in all caps. This is, the standard login, same for everybody, and you have to enter it every time you log in. Then you'll click the button for Create Account and set up your own username and password following the special rules that are listed on the screen. The program type is VITA. You don't enter a site identification number, and then you set your password recovery question and answer, and then sign in with your new account. So give that a shot. We're going to come back in 15 minutes, so 7:16, and reach out during the break if you have any questions about getting that set up. And I'll see you back here in a little bit.
All right, recording has resumed since the break has ended.
Okay, welcome back. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. Once again, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them to the best of my ability. So right now we're going to take a minute and talk about what the tax clinic looks like, and with an emphasis on how the customer moves through the clinic. So the major steps in the customer flow are screening, preparation, financial services, review, and checkout. And we're going to talk about each of those in detail. So the first part is screening. If you have not seen these volunteer checklists yet, they are on pink sheets of paper, just like they look in the slide. We give one of these to every customer, and it follows them throughout their visit to the clinic. It's a double-sided sheet of paper. There's one checklist for screening, one for preparation, one for review, and one for checkout. And so as you're working with a customer, you will want to write your name and fill out the checklist for the work that you're doing. Typically, the customers will walk in and they will talk to a CSV, that is a customer support volunteer, and 9 times out of 10, that CSV will complete the screening checklist. They're looking for a high-level overview of, does this person have the documents they need? Are they within our income guidelines? Are they within our scope? And they're going to do a few other little nuts and bolts to get the customer ready to go back and work with you. Every once in a while, it might happen. Maybe, 10 customers show up at once and there's only one CSV that day and they don't have time to do this with everybody. So you may end up screening some customers in your role as a preparer. The screening checklist is pretty straightforward. But I would encourage you to look at it, maybe before your first shift or if you have some downtime and you're in the early weeks when we don't have a lot of customers scheduled, and just kind of get to know what's on it and ask questions if you have any. But usually people will come to you pre-screened. The screening checklist is a really excellent resource in terms of just walking you through, making sure you don't miss steps. And it also makes sure that every customer has a consistent experience getting their return prepared, no matter which Prepare and Prosper site they go to. The next step is preparation. Customers typically will come in, they'll check in, they'll get screened, they'll get paperwork, they'll sit and they'll fill it out, although they may have completed paperwork already online. But then they'll get matched with a preparer and they'll go to you or one of your preparer colleagues. And so what does that look like? Well, it looks pretty much like this. Every site's going to look a little bit different, but you will have a station, usually a table where you're working. At some sites, it might be an actual desk. And they will sit with you at that station and you will work with them to get their return prepared. There's another image of what tax prep looks like. So a few helpful hints. We're going to go obviously into a lot more depth about the substantive work of preparing taxes in future trainings. But for tonight, what's important to know is you want to introduce yourself. You'll have a name tag on, but you still want to take that extra step of making sure they know your name, making sure you have their name correct, and out of recognition of the fact that you're going to be asking them a lot of deeply personal questions, it's nice to do a little bit of icebreaker, a little bit of rapport building before you jump into that. Because it can be a little unnerving if you just walk back and somebody goes, "Hi, have a seat. What's your social security number?" So again, you'll kind of start to figure out your own script for how to do this, your own internal script. But have you done your taxes with us before? Maybe make sure they know where the restrooms are. Maybe if they look like they would have trouble walking to the drinking fountain, maybe ask to, fill their water bottle or something for them. Just anything to show respect and build trust. You'll want to go over the process of getting their taxes done. They ideally will have been screened, and that is the very first step on the screening checklist, is to explain the process. But it never hurts for people to hear it more than once, because there are a lot of steps. We want to make people know what's expected of them, and we want them to know, if they haven't already heard the message that this is going to take several hours, we want them to hear it now. And we want them to understand why it's going to take several hours, and that is because there are a lot of steps in the process. So talk a little bit about what's going to happen. Then you want to look through their intake paperwork and look over their documents. The first thing you're looking for is, did they finish their intake paperwork? Sometimes, if we're really on the ball and we're moving along well, they won't have had time to finish their paperwork, and that's okay. You can help them finish it. They're also, they might have literacy challenges or vision challenges that could make it harder for them to complete their paperwork. Be ready and available to help them with that to whatever extent they need. But also look over all the documents they brought in. You're looking for anything that might be a scope issue, and you'll be better at spotting those after you've gone through all the training. You're mentally tabulating their income from all their various income statements to try and, make sure that they're within those guidelines. And you're just getting a sense of kind of like, where do I start with this? And, a sense of what you're going to have to think about while you're doing this return. Then you're going to use the paperwork to do your interview, and we're going to talk more about that today and in future trainings. Then you're going to actually enter their data into the software. I will say, always make sure you've looked over the paperwork and done your interview before you even start a return. Because if you find something that means we're not going to be able to complete that return tonight, we don't even want to have the return hanging out there in the software at all. So really focus on that interview before, don't jump to data entry. And then after you've done all of those steps, the last step in the process, aside from completing your preparer checklist, is you want to tell the customer what you're seeing as the refund amount they're getting or the balance that they're going to owe. As you're working in TaxSlayer, there's a sidebar on the right-hand side of the screen that will give you those estimates of both their federal, state, and homeowner refund if they're filing for that. But that's going to change. Every time you enter a new income statement, those numbers are going to go up or down. But it's important that you keep in mind that any numbers you're giving them are tentative, because the final numbers will not be known until the return has been reviewed. So you want to tell them what you're seeing, because you want them to, you want to be transparent. You want them to go, on to the next step, kind of having a sense of what's going on. But they have to know there's no guarantee that these are the final numbers. The reviewer could find something that would make it change. And these are some possible ways that you could explain that. Again, you will find the way that's most comfortable for you to get that across. But always remember that you want to ask if they have additional questions. They shouldn't have to go wait for review with issues still hanging out there, hanging over their heads. We don't want them to be unnecessarily stressed. And if you don't know the answers to their questions, and this is true for everything you do at the clinic, get a manager or a reviewer or a more experienced volunteer to help you. We're all there to support you. We all were new at one time. We all hopefully remember what it was like to have to ask a lot of questions. And we would always rather have you ask even the silliest question rather than guess at the answer and be wrong. Again, you should remind the customer of what happens. The big key thing is they can't leave. There are still more steps in the process. They should go back to the waiting area and wait while their paperwork goes to review. They do need to stay around. They can go outside and smoke a cigarette or make a phone call or something like that if they need to, but they should not leave the premises, because reviewers often have to check in with customers during the review process. We do still say customers are actively involved in review, even if they're not physically sitting right next to a reviewer while the reviewer is going over everything. Then when the reviewer's finished, a customer support volunteer will call their name and check them out. So go over that with them again, because they may have forgotten, and we really want to make sure they don't leave, especially because we have their social security card, so they shouldn't be leaving. And then every tax clinic is going to look a little bit different, but you're going to take their envelope that has all of their intake paperwork and their tax documents in it, and their proof of social security or ITIN. You're going to take that to somewhere near where the reviewers are sitting. Again, look different at every site, but there will always be a little wire rack that's near where the reviewers sit that is for returns that are waiting to be reviewed. So you want to put their envelope in there so the reviewers can get to it. And then the other important part of the process after preparation is, especially in the beginning, you will get feedback from the reviewer about how you did the return. And some reviewers are warmer and fuzzier than others, but they all have the common element that their feedback is designed to help you improve in your preparation skills. And so don't take it personally. Everybody gets feedback in the beginning. There's a lot to learn, but just listen to the feedback and incorporate it. This step is a little bit strange because financial services do not automatically happen between preparation and review. Financial services really can happen at any stage in the tax clinic process, but they do happen most commonly while customers have downtime in between preparation and review. So financial services are available to all of our customers. Some of them, like getting a copy of a credit report or opening a prepaid debit card to receive their refund, will actually happen and be completed in the clinic. Others, like referring to financial coaching or financial planning, we'll put in a referral and someone will follow up with them later. These referrals are things that the CSVs do. So if customers are interested in any of our non-tax financial services, you should connect them with a CSV. But also remember that while you're preparing the return, there is a good chunk of time when you will not necessarily be interviewing the customer or interacting with them that much. When you're just doing data entry after the interview is finished, CSVs may very well be coming over, especially if they're getting a prepaid debit card, because you're going to want that routing and account number before you finalize the return. So just be prepared for the fact that a CSV may be sitting at the table with you during part of this working on financial services. But again, after you get finished with preparation, the customer will go to the waiting room and wait, and their return will go to quality review. The reviewers are going to be checking for all kinds of things on returns. They're going to go line by line through the return, and they're looking for typos. They're looking for maybe, did you miss a document that needs to be added to the return? If there are really complicated high-level tax concepts involved, they may be sort of checking your reasoning and making sure you put everything in correctly. And then at the end, they're going to be printing and putting together the return for the customer so that the customer can be checked out. And during all this time, they may be checking with you and following up and asking questions. They may be talking to the customer, making sure everything was done correctly. It's important to remember quality review is a very effective tool for preparing an accurate tax return. We always want to have two sets of eyes on every return so that we know, so that we maximize the chances that we know it was done correctly. This may or may not show up on your certification test. It's also important to remember that there are two different kinds of certification, advanced and basic. And the advanced certification includes all of the topics from the basic certification, but the basic certification does not include the advanced topics. And in order to review an advanced return, that reviewer must also have advanced certification. And also very important, self-review is never an option. You may never prepare a return and then review it yourself. It always has to be a second set of eyes. Doesn't matter how busy we are, doesn't matter how short on volunteers we are. Never, ever, ever self-review. There are two different models that can be used, and we do use both of them at Prepare and Prosper. The first is to have dedicated reviewers. This is volunteers who come in and all they do throughout the clinic is review. There's also, however, a peer-to-peer review option. We call this the hybrid role. And those are volunteers who do both. So usually what happens is they come in and they prepare. And then when we get to the point, there's usually a tipping point in every shift where there aren't very many people waiting for preparation, but there are a lot of returns stacking up in the review queue. So our hybrids will switch over, stop preparing, and start reviewing. But at some sites and some other VITA programs, they always just switch off. Prepare, review, prepare, review. Either one of those is acceptable. We lost a lot of volunteers during the pandemic, and reviewers are the hardest role to recruit for because they have to have a lot of experience. And so we are moving more towards kind of more of that peer-to-peer reviewing, more trying to stock up more hybrids. So you do have to complete one season as a preparer before you can become a hybrid, but theoretically you'll be qualified at the end of your first year. Most people take a few years before they feel comfortable, but if you do feel comfortable, talk to the Volunteer Resources Department. And we'll see see what we can do. And then the last step after quality review is checkout. This is, why am I not? Okay. This is, again, a CSV, primarily a CSV role. It's the last step in the pink checklist process. The reviewers have a little bell that they'll ring, and the CSVs go, they grab the envelope, they find the customer, they do the checkout. Pretty straightforward. They make sure the customer has their important identity documents back. The CSV shares the final refund amount, which may have been what the preparer got, or it may have changed in review. The customer goes over a bunch of important information on the return to make sure it all went into the computer correctly. They're triple checking everything. Really critical stuff like the kinds of issues that the return will get rejected if they're not correct, and also contact information in case we or the government need to follow up. They will sign the consent, giving us permission to e-file for them, unless it's a paper return, in which case they will sign the actual return so they're ready to put it in the mail. The CSV gives the customer a copy of the customer's tax return, but makes sure to keep the intake paperwork and the authorization form, 8879. Remember that number, that's the e-file consent. We keep that for our records. And then this is one final opportunity for the customer to ask questions. And a few other things that CSVs go over, but it's very unlikely you'll ever be asked to do a checkout. So probably good to be familiar with the checklist, but you probably will not need it. So while you're doing all of this, there's a lot to it. So who is helping you with this? Well, you have managers and you have experienced volunteers. They can help you if you have tax questions, or they can point you to where you can find the answers. They can help you navigate various situations with customers. I would put this more as I guess I would distinguish two types of situations. There are situations where you just need to know what questions to ask the customer, and experienced volunteers are good resources for that because they've been doing this for a long time. If the situation is one where it is emotional or tense, or you're having to deliver bad news and you don't feel comfortable doing it, then that is a manager situation. Get one of us to come and talk to them. That is really what we're here for. But both managers and experienced volunteers can also help you just, if you're just confused, why is TaxSlayer doing this thing? Where do I go for this? Don't ever feel bad telling a customer that you're not sure about something and you have to go get the answer from someone else. We all do it. I do it all the time. After more than a decade, I still have to reach out to the full-time staff of the main office and say, I've never seen this before. What am I supposed to do? But then managers do a few other things around the clinic as well. We always start the shift with a team huddle where we usually at the beginning of the season, we'll do icebreakers, kind of get to know each other, team building. We also will have things like announcements that we can make, if there's been some sort of change to the tax rules, or if TaxSlayer is doing some glitchy thing that you need to know about, and we might share a workaround or something. We will make the calls like when we're not able to serve a customer, and we just kind of try to keep an eye on everything that's happening. So we're making sure that we're on track to finish up after 4 hours and get you out of there and on with your day or night. You also, though, have the Volunteer Resources Department, or VRD, and you see Sarah and Mary here. They are also critically important partners in supporting you and your whole experience volunteering. They put on volunteer appreciation events like game nights and happy hours. They do volunteer engagement activities like the bingo game that's on the back of your tax manual, which you may or may not have yet. They do contests. We will have a survey this year that is on the computer links document. So at the end of every shift, you can give feedback about how things went, how things are going generally. if you have concerns, if you feel like there were topics that should have been covered in training that weren't, or you needed more training. But also, if you just have a particularly wonderful experience with a customer, you can share that too. VRD is also they are the ones who handle scheduling for volunteers. And we schedule appointments based on the number of volunteers we're expecting. So if we have, 6 preparers at a particular site, we're going to schedule X number of customers per preparer. So if you are not going to be able to make a shift, please reach out to VRD as soon as possible, because they will then be able to put out a request to try and find somebody to sub for you. We know, of course, that things are going to come up and people are not going to be able to make every single shift, but the more warning you can give VRD, the better. And please do this through VRD. Your site managers do not have the ability to fill your spot, to find a sub for you. So, it's nice if you can tell us I'm not going to be here next week, but we will always tell you, that's great, tell VRD. And if you do have to miss, it's really great if you can maybe, pick up a shift, say like on a different night or at a different location, just kind of fill in for somebody else who needs to be away. But we understand that not everyone can do that. And also remember, you're not going to be thrown into the deep end of the pool. We throttle the appointments a little bit at the beginning of the season because we want the new volunteers to be able to shadow more experienced volunteers and then be shadowed by a more experienced volunteer. So you're not just going to be, at the deep end of the pool on day one. Just a quick recap, you have your CSVs who handle screening, financial services, and checkouts. You as preparers will interview customers and prepare. Reviewers are going to double check tax returns and correct mistakes and then print out the packets. And site managers are going to do huddle, coordinate flow, and be available as a resource to answer your questions. I would say if you're at the main office, these numbers of people per shift are probably pretty accurate. If you're at any other site, they're probably going to skew a little bit lower because we just don't do the volume that the main office does. And I think I've said it already, but just remember that every site is a little bit different and every manager is a little bit different. So your first few weeks are going to be a process of learning the specific ins and outs of your location, and that's okay. Just a quick random fact that I've alluded to ITINs a few times. Today, you'll hear a lot more about ITINs, but basically, what are they? Well, ITIN stands for Individual Tax ID Number. Okay, no, skipped one. Okay. The IRS issues ITINs to people who do not have or are not eligible for Social Security numbers, but who still need to file an income tax return, or could benefit from filing an income tax return. An ITIN will have the same format as a Social Security number, except you can always tell one because it starts with the number 9. ITIN holders are eligible for most Minnesota state credits, but they are not eligible for most federal credits. So you will learn more about this in future trainings, just different rules for people with ITINs. The other important piece to note is that the source document for an ITIN will be different. It will not look like a Social Security card. It will be on a piece of paper like the one shown. It's green. And that is the source document that you're looking for when someone has an ITIN. Unlike Social Security, like Social Security numbers, ITINs have to be applied for. Unlike Social Security numbers, ITINs have to be renewed in certain circumstances. And so for both initial applications and renewals, Prepare and Prosper has people on staff who are called certified acceptance agents. And that means they are people who are certified to be able to process both applications to get an ITIN number and a renewal. So like if someone doesn't file taxes for a certain number of consecutive years, they will need to then apply to renew their ITIN. And Prepare and Prosper can handle that, but it's only done by full-time staff members at the main office. And so if someone needs to apply for an ITIN or get a renewal, you'll want to get a manager involved so that we can make sure we get them headed in the right direction. But we do not ever want to turn someone away for not having an ITIN, and page 46 of your manual will have some information about that. So let's take a quick look at the paperwork that customers fill out when they come in. And again, sometimes they will have an opportunity to do this online ahead of time. Most customers do this in the clinic. There are 3 required pieces of intake paperwork, and they are the printed on paper that is the color that you're seeing here. There's an IRS intake sheet, a P&P specific intake sheet, and then a financial services form. The IRS intake sheet is another one of these resources that we get from the IRS, and we are required to use it. Every single customer who comes in has to fill this intake sheet out, also known as Form 13614C. It starts out by collecting demographic information. Then it asks about the if due a refund section. I did confirm this on the break that the IRS has not updated their form. It still has an option for someone to choose check by mail, but the IRS did phase out paper checks as of September of 2025. So it is important to remember that people will need an account to have their refunds deposited into. And that account can be a prepaid debit card, which is one of the financial services that the CSVs can set the customer up with at the clinic. At the bottom, they should complete the information for every person who lives in their household with them, in their house, their home, as well as anyone that they financially supported. It is important that they include everyone who lived with them in that, even if they really think that that person could not be their dependent, because you are going to do an analysis with them and figure out who might be their dependent and who might not be. The gray section in the corner is for you to fill out. They fill out everything else, and then you ask them those questions and write yes, no, or NA in all of those boxes. The second page of the IRS intake sheet asks questions about their various income sources. So they are going to fill out the part that appears in yellow on here. Basically, they look through this list of different income sources and they check whatever box applies. Then as you do your interview, you're basically going to repeat every one of those questions and mark what applies. Now, for every one of these income sources, you'll notice there's a parenthetical that has either a B or an A or a B/A. That stands for basic or advanced. And their answers on this, if they check a box, that's going to help clue us into whether they need to go to an advanced preparer or not, or whether a basic preparer can handle their tax situation. It is important to note there's some that are B/A, and those could be basic or advanced depending on which boxes are checked on the form. And so we want to make sure that we get everybody to the right preparer, but we know that there will be times when an advanced return will get to a basic preparer, and we deal with that as we come. If you are basic and you realize that there's an advanced issue on your return, just get a manager involved quickly, and we'll figure out where to go from there. If there are any bits of extra information that are important for the reviewer to know or for you to remember later in the process, make a note of that on the form. You'll get more comfortable with spotting that as you go after you've had your training, your additional training. And then I will go back actually. Uh, the one I will point out because it is the weird exception. A little below halfway down the page, there's a question about income from renting out your house or a room in your house. And that says A/M. I am told that the M stands for military. I have no idea why that would be. Don't ask me. But rental income is not something that we are able to help with. Um, so just notice, I just want to point out that that is the one weird situation. The one that looks weird. There are a lot of weird situations. Um, then page 3 asks about various expenses they might have had that might affect their tax return, as well as various life events like going to college, buying health insurance through the marketplace. Customers are going to do the same thing that they did for page 2. They're just going to check what applies to them, and then you're going to verify all of the boxes. So not just the boxes that they checked. You're going to make sure that the boxes they left unchecked for page 2 and page 3, that was correct, that they didn't just overlook something, that they actually meant to leave that box unchecked. And again, make notes for anything, items that apply or don't apply, and extra notes about additional important information. So what does that actually look like as you're filling this out? Well, there are a couple of ways that you can do this. I personally prefer to write, NA next to any unchecked box once I've confirmed that that's correct, because that just keeps me going. It makes me sure that I didn't miss anything. Other people prefer to just confirm everything, and then when they're done, write NA, like the second example, and just draw a line indicating that, I did ask about everything, and you put your initials just to confirm that. So it's really up to you how you want to do it. Page 4, this is a 6-page document. Page 4, which does not appear in your manual, is a completely optional form. If you're helping a customer fill out paperwork, you can just skip this page altogether. It's really just asking demographic data, but we ask our own demographic data on the P&P intake sheet, and we like our way of doing it better than this one. So that's what we're going to go by for the demographic data. Then page 5 is just basically.
We had a question real quick. It says, should preparer help in case customer unable to fill out intake sheet by themselves?
Yes. Yes. CSVs can also do that if the person is waiting for a preparer and the CSVs are not super chaotically busy. But yes, absolutely. If someone gets to you and their paperwork is not filled out, either because they didn't have time or because, they didn't bring their reading glasses, or they are not able to read at the level that's required to be able to understand the questions, yes, you should be helping them fill out the paperwork, all of the paperwork. Like I said, we really try to make sure they get to you with paperwork filled out, but it doesn't always work that way. So page 5 is really just a blank page. It's just for notes. And you're going to get a sense of what you have to write on there after you've gone through all of your trainings. But anytime you spend some time talking to a customer, trying to, figure out or untangle a confusing issue, write it down, because otherwise the reviewer is going to have to recreate that wheel and go back over all of that information with the customer. And it's just, it slows everybody down. It's also a big one is if they have more dependents than can be listed on page 1, use this extra space to write those down. CSVs might have written notes to you when they're doing the screening checklist. You should read those as you're going. If there's anything just kind of strange about the return, like if you would expect something to look different than it is, explain why it is the way it is. And again, this will make way more sense after you've been trained and you've done this for a while. But also any time that the manager makes an exception, like if this person is over income, you really need to note on this notes page that, Amanda said it was okay to do this return even over income, because otherwise the reviewer is going to be tracking you down and saying, do you realize this person's over income? Just anything to keep the reviewer from having to track you down, write it down. And then the final page, which also is not reprinted in your manual, is an optional consent that taxpayers can sign if they want to agree to the use of global carry forward data. And what that means is if they say yes to this and they opt in, if they go in future years to any VITA site, it doesn't have to be our site, it can be anywhere in the country that's part of the VITA program, certain data from this tax return will get pulled in to future returns. It's often kind of demographic stuff. It can also be some stuff like the employer name and employer ID number on a W-2. It can really save preparers time having to do data entry, but we understand that not everybody wants to give permission for all of their info to get, auto-populated as soon as their social security number gets entered at, anywhere in the country. So it is absolutely not required. If they do sign it, then you should record that in the software and you'll learn more about how to do that later. But if they don't sign it, that is considered, we take that as they declined to consent to global carry forward data. And we're not going to mess with it at all. Just don't worry about it. Then we have the Prepare and Prosper intake sheet, which is gray, and it's 4 pages long. And on this one, we start by trying to gather their preferred name. So if their name is Robert, but they go by Bob, we want to make sure we record here that it's Bob so that we will call them by the name they want to be called. There's a question that we want to, get to right away, which is, what are they doing here? What returns are they here to prepare? And this is really helpful when somebody wants to do a prior year. Most people are just going to want to do 2025 income taxes, but it's important to know if we're doing something different. There's also that demographic survey that I talked about before that replaces what's on page 4 of the IRS intake sheet. And then there's a way for them to opt in to getting text messages from us and being on our email list, which is not required. The next page starts with our consents. We need customers to have checked yes or no for all of these consents and signed. And if there's a spouse, the spouse needs to sign as well. It's important to know what these consents are actually asking, though, because people can get confused about them. The first one gives us permission to keep an electronic copy of their tax return for up to 6 years. This is just something we do for our records in case they need a copy of their return later, so we can get it to them. In case we have to provide audit support, just, lots of reasons why we would want to have their tax return stored, but we need their consent to do it. The next one has to do with the fact that as a nonprofit, we do marketing, we do fundraising, we apply for grants. What we are asking is the ability to take anonymous data, like the amount they got back for their refund, and then add that into our running total of how much money we've gotten all of our customers back in refunds. So, we want to be able to say in 2025, we helped X number of people get Y number of dollars worth of refunds back. So we're not asking to use any personally identifiable information about any specific customer. We just want to add their anonymous data to some of that tracking stuff. And then the third one is we're asking for consent. Basically, we have to be able to share their tax return information with TaxSlayer in order to be able to e-file their return. And then if there's a problem with the return, TaxSlayer is going to have to come back and tell us there was a problem with this return. It was rejected, and then we fix it. So they're giving consent for basically for us to use TaxSlayer and talk back and forth with TaxSlayer. It is okay for anyone to say no to any of these, but what's important to remember is that if they say no to any of these, we can't e-file their return. So a no to any of these questions means we will have to print out their return and they will have to mail it, which is slow, very slow. It takes much longer to get a refund that way, and things can go wrong, like they can lose the return, things like that. So it's very important that as you're reviewing paperwork that you look over these consents and talk to them about what they are actually, if they've said no, they should know what they're actually saying no to. Get a manager or a more experienced volunteer if you are struggling to convey that information to them. And also, we have laminated sheets that will be at all the preparer stations that explain these consents in more depth. So you can also point to that and you can kind of look at those and familiarize yourself with them, make it easier to have those conversations. And there's more information also in your manual about it. This is also where we determine their state resident status. So we want to know if they were here all year, because that's going to affect the kind of return that we're doing. And then we gather a lot of information about Minnesota-specific tax situations like credits, state credits that they might be eligible for. Page 3 collects some information about their interest in taking part in the advanced child tax credit situation. You're going to learn more about that later on, but basically the state has created the option for people to, if they're going to receive a state child tax credit for their 2026 taxes, that they have the option to receive some of those payments in advance during the year 2026, and they would opt into that at the tax clinic through you. Again, more information on that to come. There are questions about, for people who rent that have to do with that rent credit, and also homeowner property tax refund details for if they're going to do the M1PR. And then on the last page, this has to do with direct, refund and balance due information. So, how do they want to receive their money? Do they want to get a prepaid debit card, or do they want to use their bank account? It also, the IRS allows people the option of splitting their refund across multiple accounts. So they might be telling you how they want to do that. They're going to be supplying their routing and account numbers. Sometimes we tell customers to stop at that stop here line. Many of them don't, and they write in their own account numbers. That's fine. But if they follow the directions, then they'll be providing you with that routing and account number, and you'll be recording it. And if they have a balance due, this form talks about, it covers whether they want to have that directly debited from their bank account or pay a different way. The third piece of paperwork is the Green Financial Services form. Again, every customer should be filling this out, but it's not going to affect their tax prep if they skip it. So we're not going to really hound them too much. We do need the other paperwork completed. This one they can slide on if they really don't want to fill it out. But what we do want them to know is that we have a save and win contest where if they put at least $50 of their refund into a savings account, they'll be entered in a drawing for a chance to win $100 from us. 2 winners a week, and you stay in the contest until you either win or tax season ends. So if somebody enrolls in week 1, they have 12 chances, technically 24 because 2 winners a week. So that is something you should go over with everyone. It's really great if you can just kind of, have a basic understanding of what these different options are. Even if you don't need to know all the ins and outs, but it can be really helpful if you can, as you're talking to customers, think this person might be a good fit for, a referral to Exodus Lending to help with predatory debt. The more you can know about what the options are, the better able you'll be to connect people with CSVs so they can get help. And then wrapping up, gosh, we're really doing well on time here. I shouldn't say that, I'm jinxing myself, but okay, pop quiz. What is the first password that you need to have for the Tax Slayer Practice Lab? Come on, somebody shout it out.
Train Pro Web.
Yes.
Woohoo!
Woohoo.
Yep, that one.
And is that uppercase or lowercase? Or a mix?
All uppercase.
All uppercase. Yes. Love it. Fantastic. Very important to know. We don't have training comment cards because we're not in person. If you want
Virtual
to
survey that people can share out.
you have a virtual survey. That's amazing. The VRD is so on top of things.
We
Mary's
try our best.
all right. The next bit of information is remember and don't try and do this right away. But remember that at the end of all this training, you are going to need to take IRS certification tests before you can volunteer. In your bag, there is a test booklet called Pub 6744. You have 3 tests that you have to take before your first shift. And all of those test questions are in this booklet. The first test you have to take is the Volunteer Standards of Conduct test. Every single volunteer at the tax clinic has to take this one. It is a shared ethical code for every VITA site across the United States. The high points of it, I'll just go over briefly because these are in your P&P manual, and they're also in Pub 6744. So read this carefully, but we do not solicit business from taxpayers. So, you might be an accountant who, somebody's getting turned away and you think, oh, I could really help this person in my regular life. Nope, you can't. You cannot use any information that you learn about our customers to enrich yourself or attract business to yourself and your spouse or family. So, even if like you might have a spouse who does lawn care and you have a customer who's just, during their downtime, lamenting the fact that the city is on their case because their grass has grown too high and they're going to get fined if they don't mow it, but they have a disability and they can't mow their lawn. You cannot refer that person to your spouse's lawn care service. We do not accept tips as an organization or as individuals. We don't put out a tip jar. If someone wants to tip you or tip Prepare and Prosper, they can make a donation on our website, but they have to do that on their own time. And we are, but yeah, nothing like a tip at the tax clinic. Get a manager involved if you're having this conversation and you are out of your depth. We do not knowingly prepare tax returns with false information. So, we don't get to just pick and choose which documents we report or which income we report on people's taxes. And that's part of why we write notes to make sure that reviewers know what we're doing, so that they, can also be doing things accurately. And we are accurate, respectful, and professional. We treat people with courtesy and respect, and we honor their dignity. Those are the high points. There are more, but you can get them from your book. There's the second test you'll take is the intake, interview, and quality review test. I should mention both the volunteer standards of conduct and the intake interview. They're each 10 questions long. They're not huge tests. I guess technically nowadays there are 11 questions, but the 11th question is, are you sure you're ready to submit your answers? So 10 actual questions. For intake, the really major thing you need to know is that we need to see ID and social security number or ITIN documentation for everyone who comes in. For interviewing, it's important just to remember that we need to have an IRS intake sheet, that 13614C for every customer, and you as the preparer need to be reviewing it and using it as part of your tax interview and part of the preparation of the return. And then for review, just remember what I told you in those previous slides, that every return in the clinic has to be reviewed by a volunteer who did not prepare the return. And it's also important to remember that taxpayers are involved in quality review, even if they are not sitting there watching the reviewer review the return. Then the last test that you will take will either be the basic or advanced tax test. Everything that's on the basic test is also on the advanced test. So that includes filing status and who can be claimed as a dependent, kind of your basic income sources like wages, interest income, and dividends, Social Security benefits, and just kind of using the standard deduction. And that, you'll talk a lot more about that in future trainings. The advanced test will cover additional topics like self-employment income, capital gains, and income from the sale of stock, and health savings accounts. So I'm going to tell you, I don't really think the advanced test is that much harder than the basic test. If you want to jump in and try the advanced test, go for it. If you're feeling not super confident and you just want to do basic, that's fine. You can also test basic, and as the season goes on, if you feel like you're ready, you can test advanced later on in the season and then just update VRD, and they'll give you that, that advanced, they'll mark that. My co-manager at Merrick is kind of famous for strongly encouraging basic volunteers to do the advanced test, and I see Michelle laughing because she knows who I'm talking about. So, but it's really, it's not that much harder, and it's really cool to be able to do that extra stuff and to have as many volunteers as possible who can handle the advanced topics. It's helpful for the clinic. Oh, I left out itemized deductions. That's also an advanced topic. So the test is, they really make it as easy for you as they possibly can. There is no time limit. You can stop and start the tests, each one of the tests, as many times as you need to. Do it in multiple sittings. Do it over a few weeks if you need to, as long as you get it done before tax season starts. It's all open book. You can use any resource that you want to answer the questions. You can use your tax manual. You can use IRS publications. Use these training slides. You can do an internet search, although I would, of course, caution you that, some internet sites are more reliable than others. You need a score of 80% or higher to pass each of the tests. So for the standards of conduct and the intake interview, that's going to be 8 questions right out of 11, which is really 10. And you get 2 chances to pass each one of the tests. And that applies to both basic and advanced. So theoretically, if you wanted to do advanced, you could take it. If you didn't pass, you could retake it. If you still didn't pass, then you can switch and do the basic test. And then you get 2 chances with that. But I would also say if you don't pass any of the tests on your first try, please take a deep breath and email the Volunteer Resources Department before you try to take the next one. They will be able to work with you and try to set you up for success. Obviously, they can't give you the answers, but they can offer some help and support. Sometimes people just really get flustered and they want to just take that retest as fast as they possibly can, and that's often not a recipe for success. After you've finished the IRS testing, the website, the Lincoln Learn certification, which you have the URL for in your manual, will give you the option to sign your volunteer agreement. And you'll want to do that, download it, and send it to volunteer@prepareandprosper.org. That's form 13615. That gives the proof that you have done everything that you need to do. And they need to have that in place before you can do any volunteering at the tax site. Again, I mentioned that the link is in your manual. There are also instructions in your manual about how to go in and take the tests, and the link is also available through the training site. So your next step, you've already picked your volunteer role, you've done an info session and registered with us. Now you've taken the first step in your tax training. You will want to keep going. You'll want to do training B, C, D, and practice lab. And then the next step is to do your background check. So you should have gotten an email with or you will be getting one after this training. And you will want to follow the instructions in that email and consent to the background check. It is free, but we need to have it in place and recorded before your first volunteer shift. Then the next step is to take your tests. And finally, on January 22nd, there will be an orientation that is actually like a site open house. So, on Wednesday, you'll find out where you're going to be volunteering. And then on the 22nd, you can go there. We, for all the sites that are not the main office, they're all kind of pop-ups. We put everything, we set everything up at the start of every clinic, and then we break it down at the end of the clinic and put it all away. So if you're at a non-main office site, you'll get to actually witness a lot of that setup and breaking down, get an idea of how everything flows. You'll see all the different places, all the different volunteer stations. Hopefully get to meet some of your fellow volunteers who you'll be working with, and just, get confident so that you know what you're doing when you first get there. At least you know what you're doing in terms of finding the place, knowing which door to go in, and getting an overview of what the clinic is going to look like.